Now, many people will call it the mini budget that's on the way today, but there's nothing mini about this. It's very, very significant. It's going to be tabled today. It's the medium-term budget policy statement. That's the actual name. Essentially, it's going to set the tone for next year's national budget. And, of course, remember, it is an election year next year as well. So how much is that going to influence what the finance minister announces later today? Essentially, it gives us an idea of how National Treasury views the present economic situation. Government expenditure, it's exceeding revenue. They're spending more than they're getting in. And there's now talks of tapping into the country's reserves, and that cannot be good news. Let's bring in Chief Economist at Econometrix, Azar Jammine. Azar, good to have you back on ENCA with us. We'll get into the reserves question in just a moment, but I'm seeing two very clear schools of thought of this. Maybe there's some grey in the middle, but this is why you're here. It's either austerity or it's spending to promote economic growth. Where do you land? Good morning.
Good morning to you, Gareth. Where I land is probably on the side of austerity, but with certain caveats. I think, as Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana suggested in a conference I attended over the weekend of the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation, he said, yes, he has no other alternative but to pursue austerity, but at the same time, he is prepared to borrow a little more than planned simply because the alternative would be too horrific to contemplate. And I tend to agree with him because there's certain expenditures that I think the government has no alternative but to go with, such as extending the special social relief for distress grant of 350 Rand per month to 8.5 million indigent individuals who have no access to other social grants.
Absolutely. And Azar, I mean, one of the questions that are going to be asked as well, we had Cosatu's Matthew Parks on with us a little bit earlier as well, and he was saying rather cut back on the government fat. You know, reduce the number of ministers, reduce the number of deputy ministers, because if they don't do that, what they're going to do is cut the wage bill, which is then going to affect those that are earning, in some cases, minimum wage. It's a fair argument.
You're absolutely correct, and Matthew Parks is absolutely correct in that premise. Having said that, there are many who would argue that the government wage bill is already too expansive, and that in fact there would be no harm in reducing the rate of increase in that wage bill. And one of the reasons why the government is now facing this dilemma that it has is because it was compelled in negotiations with the public service to grant them pay increases way ahead of what it had originally planned to do.
Let's talk about this discussion around dipping into the reserves. I think a lot of people are going to start panicking when they hear about dipping into reserves to pay off government debt and to service government debt. I mean, that's essentially, for the average person, it's as though taking out a loan from the bank to pay off your credit card. And anybody in the world of finance is going to say, that's a very bad idea.
Quite rightly so. And I don't think that this proposal is going to get very far with the government at present, nor with the Reserve Bank. Essentially, it's almost a fictitious reserve that's being created by the Rand's depreciation, whereby the foreign exchange reserves that are held by the Reserve Bank have gone up in Rand terms simply because the Rand itself has depreciated a lot. The Reserve Bank's need to sustain those reserves is still unmitigated. And what these proponents calling for us to dip into reserves are basically setting us up for is a massive depreciation of the currency at some point, where foreigners lose total confidence in the ability of the government to meet its foreign debt and foreign payment commitments. And you would end up with much, much higher inflation, which tends to tends to harm the very people that you are purportedly trying to assist, the poor.
Let's talk.
The poor tend to suffer.
Of course, they always tend to suffer the most in the end, don't they? As I want to ask this for those who are paying their taxes. I say it it deliberately that way, because not everyone is paying their taxes. They should, but they aren't. There's a tax revenue shortfall. But what could the minister do that taxpayers need to look out for? If you're taking out potentially more loans, if you're talking about this dipping into the reserve, ultimately government is playing with citizenry money. The citizenry is financing what government can do. Where does this money come from? It's not monopoly money.
No, it is tax revenue. And one of the problems that the government has faced on this occasion is that, unlike what happened in 2022, this year we've seen a sharp fall in international coal prices and the prices of palladium and rhodium. And we've already seen it in the results of some of these mining companies involved in those minerals, where their profits have plummeted by 60, 70%. And of course, if your profit plummets by that amount, so too will the tax that you pay plummet by that amount. So that bonanza that we had in 2021-22 of higher commodity prices has vanished. And so we are now facing this unfortunate situation of far less tax revenue than we thought we could get. But yes, you have highlighted also another potential way in which more tax revenue can be accumulated, and that is to try and close the net on those who've been taking out money from the country illegally, or to tax people on their foreign earnings to a far greater extent than has been the case thus far. A lot of those individuals have been invited to apply for voluntary disclosure, in which case they pay a small penalty and end up paying tax on whatever they earn overseas. But there are also a lot who haven't actually complied in that manner yet.
And Azar, just as I say goodbye to you for today, and I'm sure we'll talk again after the medium-term budget policy statement, which is live on ENCA this afternoon. By the way, you know I always like to do this to you. The finance minister has left part of his speech open, and he's called Azar Jammine and said, OK, you finish this for me. What am I missing in my budget speech? What should I be saying? What do South Africans want to hear? You're the expert. What do you want to hear in the speech? What's your one headline that you want to hear about tomorrow morning?
I think the one headline that I want to hear is the courage shown by the Minister of Finance in resisting calls by other members of his political party for him to give way to a more populist approach to the government's finances. We are very fortunate that we have three important people holding the fort at the moment, and that is Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago, SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter, and hopefully today we will be able to comment that Enoch Godongwana is part of that triumvirate that is preventing this economy from blowing out completely.
So courage is what we're looking for this afternoon as well. As always, Azar, good to talk to you. Thanks very much for your time, giving us some great insight as to what the expectation is from an economic perspective as well, falling on the austerity side of things, because it's almost like having a government credit card, running around, spending all the money. Now it's run out. Now you want to take a loan to pay the credit card, but then you must pay the loan back as well. It's a messy situation. I mean, this is why you have people going to debt rescue. I wonder how government would get themselves into debt rescue. There's food for thought.
and as Azar Jammine says, not go with the populist view.
Yeah.
So it will take that courage, it will take that leadership. But we do await the medium-term budget speech. And